now the focus for India should be to increase its budget allocations for healthcare and education. Our research
Mm-hmm.
scholars, our doctors, our IITs are excellent centers of learning. Because we have the benefit of manpower, and we also have the benefit of state of the art institutions like the Serum Institute and other things, where people respect Indian scientists, Indian doctors, Indian intelligence, and we would like to create a mutual symbiosis between countries, which can give us some positive technology, and we can mass produce it and bring prices down globally.
Hi everyone. We're back here today to talk about the fight against COVID and what's happening. Once again, to give a background, there's a consultant group that is appointed to consult with the task force that's actually working on this at a state level. So we are bringing different personnel from the consulting group to meet with you to see what their perspectives are and how they are advising the government, etc. So far we've had a medical perspective, we had a legal perspective, we had a political perspective. Today we have a health perspective, but a legal perspective, and from somebody who's more in the public health, who's at the intersection of law and public health and a really good understanding of international law, etc. So just a little bit of a preamble before I bring her on is that, again, as we've been talking for the last week, this is not a fight of one person, one organization, one state, not even one country, so we have to be together from many, many points of view. So just to give a brief summary, so far, we've had a legal perspective that said that, it's a 123-year-old epidemic act that we are following, and the government has the authority to do whatever it takes to contain. And then we had a health perspective that's talking about the mental burden even that all the health workers are going through, the doctors are going through. When you see somebody dying in front of you or suffering in front of you on an ongoing basis, and you're worried about your own family being infected when you go home. I mean, it's a very, very tough situation. So we have, that from a medical perspective. And then we have Tejasvi Surya, who was here talking about, the political perspective of what is it to be a bridge between the state and the center. What are the things that are being done? And we talked about how things are being expedited to give permissions to new innovations, or to take care of people, or to give permits, how everything is getting fast-tracked. So I think, and we also had yesterday somebody from Queensland talking about what's happening there as a representative of Queensland in India. What are some of the things he's going through, etc. And I think it's extremely important for all of us to learn from each other at this point, from different people from different countries, different faiths, different places. We all need to learn from each other. So I want to bring on, our guest today. Her name is Simar Suri, and she's a lawyer. While I get her on, let me give you a brief background. She's somebody who's gone off to London School of Economics, law there, and came back to India, works in a firm here focusing on international law, and is advising the consultative group on what are the implications of anything and everything we want to do from a global perspective, and also what is the implication on us when we collaborate with others, because for the first time we are working in a situation where the country borders don't mean anymore. There are people who came from different parts of the world who are here, and there are people from here going to different parts of the world. So in some ways, it's very difficult to figure out what the situation is. So just give me a second. I'll try to get her on.
Hi, Lakshmi.
Yes. Hi, Sima. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. So I think as we go through this consulting group, we are getting more diverse and more younger also. So really wonderful to have you with your experience, especially in the international arena. So, I just wanted you to give a little introduction of yourself and tell us about what you do at your law firm. I mean, before all this, how you were dealing with an international clientele.
Okay. So before all of this and while it's going on, I head the international practice group at my law firm, and I also do a lot of work in public policy advisory. So for about 7 years, my focus has been mostly on public health, tobacco control, tobacco control litigation, pan-India, tobacco policies, policies to look at how universal healthcare can be achieved in India with various think tanks. Then I also, on the commercial side, look at structuring investments from South Korea, Belgium, Singapore, Japan, and I advise them on how to set up in India, what's the best way to go about it. And I think, like you said, with a global perspective and having lived in London with people of all jurisdictions and countries, I've come to understand that my local experience coupled with my international exposure makes the perfect storm for explaining to people outside how things work here and explaining their point of view to local people here. So
yeah, and where are right now with this epidemic, we are, as I said earlier, dealing with people from all over the world, trying to learn best practices of what's happening there, and what are some unique things here that we can export. Like for example, if you want to accelerate PPEs, medical device innovations, all these kinds of things, what can we learn from other places? So in your dealings, I mean, especially you work with South Korea, you work with Belgium, you work with all these places anyway. So can you give me like one or two examples of what can we learn from them and what we have here that we can talk to others?
Absolutely. So what we learn, India needs to take the best global practices and also learn from other countries what not to do. So what I've noticed in my experience is that countries which have taken a cautious approach and understood that this humanitarian crisis that has risen out of China is something that is a global problem, have reacted well to it and have managed to control the crisis, whereas countries which have been complacent have managed to get deeper into problems. So we learn from the best and not so best of the world. India's done well so far by imposing a lockdown, but we have to base our own policy on factual data, on the local conditions, and not only on assumptions and presumptions and politics. So what is important is to get an understanding of what our peculiar problems are. For instance, spitting is a very, very quick way of spreading the infection. And India, and this problem is endemic to India and to some countries around us, where we chew tobacco. Large part of our population chews tobacco. So when you spit, you are causing other people to be more exposed to the infection and the disease, and you're also causing extreme public health concerns, and their right to life is obviously going to trump this. So in this situation, we need to formulate a tailor-made policy which takes our local conditions into consideration before we apply any international sort of formula. South Korea is a great example. India and
Sorry,
South Korea.
one second. Before we go to South Korea, let me finish that question in terms of, yes, when spitting is a problem, can we really impose a law that says you cannot spit publicly, and if you do, you'll be taken to jail? I mean, can we really say stuff like that? And there are parts of India, like in some states, where it's like spitting is just, way of life. So, I mean, how can we actually impose it? That it's I mean, of course, there is a health awareness, like how we are telling people not to cough in public or, whatever. But how do you impose something of this? Can you truly put a law and say you cannot spit?
Yes, actually, health is a state subject under the constitution.
Yeah.
And some states have already come out with notifications, Uttar Pradesh, and being the leader in this.
I mean, I was thinking of Uttar Pradesh or, MP, all those areas are very high, pan chewing or tobacco chewing states, or like Andhra, some parts do a lot of tobacco.
So we can also use the Epidemics Act to say that in the event of a national emergency and a crisis, any and every step has to be taken to control the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a great. There is a very direct link between spitting and the spread of the disease. So that should not be a problem to defend the right to trade in. If you consume tobacco, you have to spit it out. And so if you stop, I mean, nobody stops anyone from spitting in general otherwise, but yes, you can impose a law to stop them, and some states have already done so.
They have. Okay, so like, did UP do that, saying
yes.
it's a law?
Okay. Fines will be imposed.
Yeah, and so I mean, there's a law, and there is the actually following of the law, and then be punished for not following the law, right? So there are three different things. So you could have a law, but if you don't follow it, people say, "Chalega, abhi ke liye theek hai, just next time don't do it," type. So is it really being adhered to also? I mean, is it possible to truly make it happen?
So see, since time immemorial, Lakshmi, I've seen that law follows custom and custom follows law. So you see, if we make this a part of everyone's conscious behavior, I've never been to a grocery store in a local market where people are not constantly brushing past you or, trying to get vegetables before you or nudging past you to go. But right now, everyone is trying to be conscious of social distancing, moving away, stepping back. So I think it's more a function of time, and people will get it.
Correct. Yeah. Sorry. And then you were talking about South Korea. Go ahead.
I was saying, so like you said, just to take on from this, a policy that has been made at an executive level needs to have effective implementation channels, and it needs to be implemented. So, like I said, for South Korea, for instance, it should be an effort if we are running short of PPE or medical diagnostics, and we know South Korea has managed to flatten the curve and they're doing well and they have tested. What needs to happen, in my opinion, is that the Prime Minister should contact the President of Korea and say, I need your active assistance in this. And it should not be an ad hoc state to country or a private player to a country sort of negotiation or a decision happening, because South Korea is a prime example because we don't have historical baggage with them. They want to invest in India. They want to move away from the Chinese model. And I think Make in India came out strong on a policy level, but on implementation, we were lagging behind. And now is the chance for us to step up and make ourselves a viable alternative to...
like for what? Is it for manufacturing PPEs or in what way, for which one?
So everything. So in terms of, say, budget allocation, now the focus for India should be to increase its budget allocations for healthcare and education. Our research scholars, our doctors, our IITs are excellent centers of learning. And if we can get technology transferred here and have them because we have the benefit of manpower and we also have the benefit of state-of-the-art institutions like the Serum Institute and other things where people respect Indian scientists, Indian doctors, Indian intelligence, and we would like to create a mutual symbiosis between countries, which can give us some positive technology, and we can mass produce it and bring prices down globally.
Yeah.
So,
And how would you play a role between the private enterprise and the government and the law? For example, my understanding is there is a thing passed now that says that all the private entities should test for free or something of that sort. So, I mean, how will a private enterprise, who will pay them? You know, somebody has to at least cover the cost. So, can you explain a little bit about the law and how do you think it will actually be implemented?
sure, this has happened in the last 3 days. It is a very valid question by the private players. They were brought in to ramp up testing, but at this point, with this knee-jerk reaction that has come from the Supreme Court without considering other modalities.
Can you tell us what the edict from Supreme Court was?
So
Just so
Supreme
everybody.
Court's order is basically a two-line order, and it says that all private players should make testing free. One, the test costs money. So is the government going to foot the bill? Is the taxpayer going to foot the bill? Then you may as well charge the person who's coming in for the test. And how are we going to go about this on an implementation level? So the obvious problems you see is that now a private lab can turn around and say, sorry, I don't have enough tests to test anyone, because they don't have any inclination to take on the financial burden. And the whole point of bringing in private players was to make sure that a certain part is redirected to the private players so they can churn out things more quickly, and there is less pressure on government hospitals. Either you privatize the government hospitals, private hospitals, you nationalize them. But if you're not doing that, then this will be a problematic thing. It was challenged today. I have to check the outcome of that, but it was challenged today.
Yeah, so we have to figure that out. And also, how is the law working? Because all the courts are shut down, but I'm sure there are cases that need to be resolved. There is emergency. How is it working? I mean, there's a work at home for us, so even if we don't go to office, we can do it. But can law function without courts? I mean, are you guys arguing online, or is there resolutions made online? I mean, how is it happening?
So e-courts have been in the offing for very, very long, but there was resistance to change. And I think every time there is a thesis and an antithesis, a synthesis comes about very quickly. So the courts have quickly resolved this by moving to e-courts and things. Of course, there's a temporary lag in litigation, which is when you go to courts. Corporate and transactional law can be done from anywhere because most of our clients are abroad anyway, and it's mostly digital. So that is something that does not stop no matter what is happening. Courts have also reacted to this extremely well in India. They are learning to evolve very quickly. They have also cancelled summer vacations, which has never been done in the history of courts in India. And they understand the pressures on litigants, because people wait for years sometimes, and the courts are aware of this. They're sensitized to this, and courts are functioning for urgent matters anyway. So although lawyers don't come under essential services, sometimes even being a part of a system such as the judiciary puts a very important moral duty on you to be able to answer and give solutions to litigants when they need you.
Yeah. So is that happening now? At least in the corporate and the sector, there's e-courts, and it's started now. Now, when there is something like a really criminal cases and stuff, can e-courts function for that as well, or is it mostly for corporate cases right now?
No, at this point, the Nirbhaya judgment came out in the middle of this whole thing, and that was a criminal act. And the courts take on all the matters that are urgent,
Okay.
and it could be anything, but as long as
Yeah.
it's urgent. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's pretty amazing that, sometimes you have to hit a wall for you to adapt something very, very quickly, I think.
Absolutely.
So, and also, like in every country, there's a legal, there's a government, and there is a private, there's different groups, right? So, how is the legal fraternity, help the medical fraternity? Like, for example, when we talked about these tests, etc., when someone says you have to do it for free, but the medical fraternity should be able to turn to somebody and say, but who's paying us? So they have to come to you. So, in what way are the legal fraternity coming to the rescue of the medical fraternity in today's?
When it comes to state policy, there is already a framework where there is a Solicitor General and Advocate General, advocates on record. Everyone's already in touch with the state for formulating policy. When private players come to the lawyers, the lawyers then assume the voice of the medical fraternity or any client, but in this particular scenario of the medical community, and relate it back to the authorities, whether it's the judiciary, so whether we draft petitions in court, or if it's a regulatory body like the Indian Council of Medical Research or the Drug Controller's Office. It is our responsibility to analyze, because also policy on this is changing by the hour. It's like the stock market. There are customs duties in the morning, and in the evening they're waived off. So how do you quickly relate that in terms of putting your clients or your group's views forth without compromising on the integrity of what they're trying to do, and also giving them a strategy or a plan on how to get their regulatory hurdles, because see, the doctor's job is to fight at the front lines, so they should not be concerned with filing applications or waiting to hear on them. That is something that we need to figure out as policy advisors, or and tell them that, okay, not this authority, but we have to go to this authority, and this is what will happen, and this is how we'll get it done. So sometimes you use more of your persuasion skills and soft skills and other skills which you've learned over the course in dealing with various people, and get the job done.
And we hear a lot of news about doctors being beaten up, or some of the apartments saying we don't want the doctors to stay here. And I don't know how true they are. I'm sure there's some modicum of truth in that. Are you seeing that happening? I mean, obviously, like one of my friends was saying, he lives in Bombay. He was saying that it's quite ridiculous that his building, they're fighting, saying that the two doctors in the building shouldn't live there anymore. And he's like, are you kidding? And there's a whole bunch of them that are saying, are you kidding? These people are saving people, so we shouldn't throw them out of the building. But there is this real fights, because when people get scared for their life, they do crazy things. So are you seeing any cases where the doctors are really abused or asked to leave their homes, or is it just, kind of too much news?
Personally, I have not seen this, because if it is happening, it is appalling. It is shameful, and really criminal prosecution needs to take place, because when a health worker takes a Hippocratic oath, they follow through, and they are at the front lines. They are risking their lives, their families' lives, for the community at large. So to lash out at them personally is something that we need to protect them from, and that becomes a moral duty on all of us, not only lawyers, but the community as a whole, society as a whole. And it's not
that's what my friend was saying. And sorry, he was saying that you have to fight at the root, of the if some people are being conservative and saying throw them out, then the rest of them are rising up and saying, no, we don't. We actually thank them. I mean, what's the point of getting out at 5 o'clock and clapping and thanking them and saying, get out of my apartment? I mean, it's sort of, you can't do that. So people are not keeping quiet. They're talking back and saying, no, you can't do this. So it's happening, but I was just wondering. Another question I have for you is that you went to a school in London. Your classmates, I'm sure, are in different parts of the world, at different places, etc. So what are some of the things you're learning from them about how you even come out of a lockdown? Because going into a lockdown is an act, and coming out of a lockdown is also an act. So what insights do you have into? Do you do it in a phased state, or do you extend it, or what are you seeing at other places, and what do you think should be done in India?
Okay, so I think India has taken an extremely proactive step, and it was done at the right time. The lockdown was done at the right time because there was no other way to isolate and treat people. And at this point, what we need to focus on is a clear exit strategy. So in terms of that, we cannot extend. There is no medical reason to extend the lockdown because at this point we can trace the contact. We are at that stage where it is under control to the extent that you can trace where it's come from for any infected patient. There is no medical reason, but what we learn is that there are different countries, and some countries have been complacent, and they are reaping. They're bearing the loss of that. There are some countries which have looked at this cautiously. So I'll compare Italy and South Korea for you. Italy didn't think this was a Western problem. They thought it's a China problem. They had a Hug a Chinese Day, which has been confirmed by a classmate of mine who is a sitting member of parliament in Italy. And they did not take this very seriously. They did not wear masks.
I understand. Hug a Chinese Day, what do you mean by that?
Was a social campaign to prevent racism. So all of the people who came for Chinese New Year from Wuhan, there was a public, thing where they said that, you shouldn't discriminate against them and call it the Chinese virus, which is okay, which is politically correct. Yeah. But they didn't take social distancing norms seriously. They did not. There were people who escaped from the red zones, and Italy's healthcare is was rated number 1 in the world, and they couldn't handle it. But countries like South Korea have managed to contain things despite certain stray incidents. Like India, we've had stray incidents of people coming in. Korea also, there was a religious a lady who came, instead of going to the doctors, she went to some lunch with her friends and then to a religious ceremony in Daegu city. So, so all of these experiences tell you that the only reason they were able to quickly isolate that one case, patient number 33, coming from Wuhan to South Korea, was because they quickly started testing, and they quickly started equipping their healthcare workers with protective wear. And there is a difference why people are dropping like flies in Italy, and they're running out of ICU beds. And even though it's come back in China and South Korea, they're managing to contain it.
Yeah. So we are running out of time. So I want to ask you a last question of what do you think for India the exit strategy? Is it a phased exit, or what do you think? What would you recommend?
So I would definitely recommend. There are 3 or 4 things I'll quickly take. One, there needs to be a phased coming out of the lockdown. You can't extend the lockdown unless it's extreme, because there'll be a huge cost to the economy. You need to have hotspots which are contained, and then treat and isolate those, and then come back to normal life. Gradually. Yeah. It will take 6 months, and this attitude of caution has to continue until we have the vaccine, which is 18 months away. We can't let our guard up at all. And there needs to be a higher budget allocation for healthcare and research and education, because in the short
Yeah.
term it may not reap benefits, but in the long term our scientists, our IITs need to be given an impetus.
Correct.
The message of globalization was that every country is interdependent, but we now need to look at deglobalization and become self-sufficient. So to become self-sufficient, we need to look inwards and develop our own indigenous solutions to problems. And also, India came out strong on the Make in India policy, but now is the time we need to completely, capitalize on it and make ourselves a viable alternative to China. And we need to look at a synergy between Japan, India, Korea, and America to be an alternative where we come collectively as a community to engage, to discuss, but yet we develop our own individual solutions to problems.
So thank you so much. I want to acknowledge Dr. Kunal Sharma has answered. Somebody said that South Korea has had 4% of the people tested, but in India we have not done a good job. I think we are getting our act together, and I think we will get there. And we are all doing our best to contain it. And I want to thank all the people who have joined us, and thank you so much for your time. And look forward to making you so much more contribution to this whole conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Please follow Lakshmi Praturi, follow Ink Talks, follow Samir, and also follow the COVID task force that we have. Keep safe, stay at home. Thank you. Bye-bye.